After recently moving out of that house and with no incidents in the month since moving, I feel like I'm ready to share my story. Essentially, in the house my family used to live in, there was some sort of entity that could shape-shift and mimic people/animals. The first encounter happened in late 2019, after we had already lived in the house for well over a decade. I was in bed with my girlfriend. We hadn't yet fallen asleep that night, and I was getting out of bed to go to the toilet before going to sleep. On the way out, I turned off the light. When I returned and opened the door, she called out and asked who was coming in. I responded that it was obviously me, and she screamed. So I turned on the light. She was freaking out, so I asked her what was going on. She said that a couple of minutes before I got back, someone, whom she presumed was me, had entered the room, got into bed, and started cuddling up to her. When I actually came back and she realized that she wasn't lying next to me, she moved as far away as possible, but when I turned the light on, no one was in the room besides us. She said it felt just like me cuddling up to her. We ended up staying at her place that night, and she refused to ever come back. The next incident happened on the 11th of July 2020. I looked up the date of a football game that was on. I was watching the TV by myself when my dad opened the door and stood in the doorway. I wasn't paying much attention to him and absent-mindedly asked him if he ended up watching the end of the game his team was playing in. They had made a pretty good comeback. He didn't respond, so I looked over at him and noticed that he was wearing one of my shirts, which was weird because it's not something he had ever done before. I then looked down and noticed that both of his legs were there. He had a leg amputated in 2017. Normally, he'd have a fake leg, one that is basically just a metal pole with a foot on the end, not one you could mistake for an actual leg. I must have had a serious look of shock on my face because right after looking at his legs and noticing what was wrong, he backed away and slammed the door. I ran down to the back shed where my dad was earlier and found him there. I asked if he had just been in the house. He said he hadn't left the shed in hours. I didn't want to tell him what happened, so I just said I thought I had heard him calling. I found the shirt Dad was wearing on my floor along with a bunch of other dirty clothes. The next case also involves the mimic pretending to be Dad. Dad is a diabetic and will occasionally have a hypo, where he becomes non-responsive, and it can be sort of like talking to a child who will hardly respond and doesn't know where they are or what's going on. Mom found him sitting on the couch, and he wouldn't respond to her when she talked or nudged him, so she worried that he was having a hypo. She went out to the kitchen to get insulin, but when she returned, he wasn't on the couch. She then freaked out because she couldn't find him. After searching for a few minutes, she tried calling him, hoping that his phone was on him and she'd be able to hear it. Dad answered his phone. He'd been at work the whole time. The last encounter we had was a couple of months ago. About a week after our dog had passed away. She was old. I don't think the mimic caused it if you were wondering. We were in the kitchen, from where you can see down the hallway. Leading off the hallway is another short hallway part, with a door on the end where our dog's doggy door is. We heard the doggy door open, which was strange as we only had the one pet. We looked down the hall and saw what looked exactly like our dog. Mom was beside herself with fright and said that, now it looks like Molly, our dog. I was scared too but aggressively said to it, we know you're not her, she's dead, F off. Then it made a horrifying noise. It sounded like a cat who had had its tail stomped on. It then bolted out of sight and through the doggy door. Mom and Dad decided that they wanted to move, so luckily we were able to move out about a month ago. I haven't seen anything out of the ordinary since that last incident, so I'm hoping it was attached more to the house than us.
I don't even know where to start on this one. I'm just going to flat out say that even this title sounds insane. A few months back, I started working with a lovely older lady who I'll call A. She was twice my age, and over our tenure together, she sort of became like a mother/sister figure. She was married to another lovely older lady I'll call N, and they had been married for over 15 years. we became very good friends over time when we found out we were all interested in history. Well, I would have them over, and at some point, we started talking about conspiracy theories. One thing led to the next, and I started talking about reptilians, but in like a joking I hope they don't think I am being serious but kind of am being serious way. It wasn't until then they started getting uncomfortable. Anne mentioned how she was a historian though, and was telling me stuff about how the Roman Empire never fell and like the Tower of Babel type of thing. Like almost as if she had been there. It was really strange, and something didn't feel right about how she was describing these historic events. Like me typing this out doesn't do it justice at all, so they leave. Keep in mind this was the first time I ever had them over. Then the power in just my apartment goes out, and I get a call from A as soon as it goes out. A and N previously liked to prank call me before, but the timing was strange this time. Like they knew it was out. It seriously freaked me the heck out. Well, a month or two later, I have just N over because she wanted to have discussions about Roman history and miscellaneous philosophy. Well, at one point out of the blue, she started talking about how her body temperature has always been that of what she referred to as a dead man and said that doctors were baffled by her anatomy because other than that she was perfectly healthy and even had me touch her skin. I kid you not, she felt like she should have wrapped herself up in like 10 blankets. And then it seemed as though it wasn't her anymore. Like she was trying to tell me that she wasn't who I thought she was. But the weird part was that she seemed like even if she were reptilian, that she was a part of this rare group of them that just wanted to live amongst humans. Maybe I'm not doing them any favors by making this post and maybe I sound crazy, but after she left, they called me and started talking to me about a magenta-colored UFO that appeared over their porch the previous night. And then she started going into explicit detail about what it was doing to her perception of time until I heard N in the background telling her to stop. And they sort of changed the subject with A saying something along the lines of, "Oh, don't you love my improv?" leading into the next part of the convo. They then started joking with me and saying that they were aliens and that it didn't matter what I thought. But not in a condescending way, though. Like they were going along with a part. But also like they were really trying to tell me they weren't human without actually telling me. I had this on my mind for a minute, so that explains why this got uploaded so late/early. Currently, 3 a.m. here. I really just hope I'm crazy. Please tell me I'm crazy.
My grandfather was a badass. He was born in Alberta during the early 30s and raised his 3 brothers on a reservation from the time he was 9. His parents left for BC with their only daughter, promising to return, but none of the boys ever saw them again. To make ends meet, he learned carpentry, worked as a laborer, and bare-knuckle boxed against older men for extra cash. He learned how to track and hunt, always coming home with something to eat when work was scarce. At 14, he put the second oldest brother in charge of the household, left the res in search of his parents and a better life, and never went back. That was the last time he saw any of his family members. He spent several months riding the rails, befriending some transients while using his fighting skills to defend himself against others. Eventually, he made his way to Vancouver, the last known whereabouts of his parents and sister, and started working in a pulp mill. At 17, he met my grandmother, and the two eventually married, leading to him giving up his search for his family. They bought some land, and he spent his free time building several houses, which still stand today. One of those sat on the land he bought with my grandmother, which included acres of wooded area. On this land, my grandparents kept horses, dogs, and small farm animals for eggs and meat. My aunt was born in the early 50s, and then my mother came along right before the end of the decade. As far as I've heard, nothing bad or strange really happened until my mom found an old Ouija board and played with it by herself, but I don't know if that has any relation to this story. My mother was around 8 when she was riding her horse through the wooded part of their acreage. The horse stopped dead in its tracks. My mom tried to spur it on, but it was frozen in fear, and all of a sudden, she smelled something like rotting garbage and meat. She pulled back on the reins, and the horse instantly turned and took off back towards the house, almost knocking her off its back several times along the way. Afterward, that horse was never the same. It would try to kick her, and if she got on it, it would fall backward, trying to crush her beneath it. Once, it started acting like its old self again, letting her climb onto it, but once she did, it ran towards the road and stopped abruptly, bucking her forward into the path of an oncoming car. My grandpa saw it happen and put a shotgun to its head, and the horse just kept breathing heavily and staring straight ahead. My mother barely missed being run over by a car that saw the horse coming and managed to swerve out of the way. And my grandmother begged my grandfather not to shoot the horse. He finally decided to give it away when he saw my mother wasn't badly injured. That same horse fell on the next person to ride it, breaking her collarbone, and the father did what my grandpa said he should have done the first time. After that, animals started going missing, and one of the hunting dogs was injured by something during an attack at night. My grandpa set out some traps and stayed in the hayloft above the barn with a shotgun and rifle beside him, sleeping out there for several nights. He figured it was foxes, or maybe coyotes or wolves, or even a desperate bear, which is what he attributed the smell in the woods to and the horse's reason for losing its mind. But nothing came the entire time he slept out there, and eventually, he figured it had moved on to easier prey or died. The day after he stopped sleeping in the barn, my mom was out near the tree line playing with the injured dog as it was healing. Out of nowhere, the dog started sniffing the air, then positioned itself between my mom and the trees, growling and barking. My grandpa heard the noise and came out, stopped in his tracks, and called back to my grandmother to bring his rifle, then whistled for the dogs. My grandma came out, handed him his gun, then asked what was going on. As the dogs all started to react like the first one, my grandfather pointed to one of the treetops, which looked longer and thicker than those around it, but it was very slightly moving. It was at least 6 feet tall, he told me later on when he'd retell the story, but probably a good bit taller. He took aim and fired just as he saw a pair of wings start to open up. Whatever was up there was watching them, but he beat it to the punch. It was a kill shot, directly in the chest with a high-powered rifle. And he instantly started running forward with all of the dogs following him as the thing plummeted to the ground, the breaking of tree branches wholly unmistakable. When he reached the impact point, he raised his rifle again and commanded the dogs forward to flush it out, but they all just stood in the spot and kept spinning around, trying to catch a scent that seemingly disappeared. A pile of broken branches lay in an obvious landing spot, but beyond that, there was no proof that anything had happened. No body, no blood, no trail. It had either disappeared or gone straight back up the way it came. He searched those woods for several days but never found a sign of what that thing was. And they didn't see it or experience issues with the animals after that. Decades later, when he was dying, he kept talking about how he saw something. In his delirium, he referred to it as an alien but said it was coming back for him. I've never seen that man scared of anything in my life, but there was actual panic and fear in his voice. A few nights before he died, he had already been too weak to stand on his own for several days, and my grandmother awoke to the sound of a gunshot. She ran outside, fearing the worst, and saw my grandpa lowering his rifle, staring at something in the distance. She took the gun away and helped him back inside, and that was it. I don't know if whatever it was actually did come back for him, or if it was a hallucination of an old memory, but I'd like to think he went out with a final FU to the thing that tried to torment his family all those years ago.